Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vera Pekteleva. Vera Pekteleva was born on September 24, 1997 in Kelos, Kovo Oblast. As she grew up, she became a cheerful and creative individual. With a passion for singing, she secured first place in various school competitions. Although her parents, Oksana and Yvonne, divorced during her school years, they remained on good terms. Vera maintained a positive relationship with both her father's new wife and her mother's new husband. Those who knew her described Vera as a kind, optimistic, and non-confrontational person. As mentioned earlier, Vera was a creative individual, and her family was taken aback when, after completing high school, she opted to move to Kovo and pursue a technical education at the state university, rather than following a more artistic route. Her mother, Oksana, resided in Kisilov, which was approximately 110 miles away from Kovo, and Vera would visit her during her spare time. During one of her visits in 2016, Vera encountered Vladislav Kanyus, a young man of her age. Unlike Vera, Vlad, as he was commonly known, was a complete contrast. He did not have life goals, was introverted, and had a quick temper. Having dropped out of school after the 9th grade, Vlad grew up in a troubled home. After his mother abandoned the family, he was left to live with his father. Unfortunately, his life was filled with more challenges. His father had frequent run-ins with the law, which ultimately culminated in him taking his own life in front of Vlad, leaving an indelible mark on him. Vera fell in love with Vlad despite having little in common with him. However, her parents were against their relationship, knowing Vlad's troubled past. Vera's father discovered her relationship with Vlad, and he asked her to end it. Instead of breaking up with Vlad, Vera just stopped discussing him with her parents. Vlad was never present at family gatherings, and his pictures were not posted on Vera's social media. It seemed as though Vera was keeping him a secret, according to Oksana, Vera's mother. One important detail is worth noting. In 2019, Vera and Vlad began cohabiting in Kovo. Vera's parents financially assisted with the apartment, and Vlad, who was unemployed by choice, thoroughly enjoyed living with Vera, who was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also financially secure. She consistently had money and supported him. However, their relationship was strained. Vlad struggled with alcohol addiction and showed no inclination to seek help or change his behavior. Her parents were convinced that Vlad was abusive to her. After years of suffering, Vera made the brave decision to end the toxic relationship in November 2019. However, Vlad refused to accept this and disputed her choice. As her parents had financially supported the couple's apartment, Vera reasonably expected Vlad to vacate the premises. But Vlad was unwilling to give up the benefits of living off someone else's generosity. Now here's an excerpt from Vlad's testimony. It will give you a more accurate idea of what happened after Vera decided to end her relationship with him. But remember, this is Vlad's testimony, so it's up to you whether you believe his words. On December 15, 2019, a fight broke out between him and Vera over his desire to visit a nightclub, which she opposed. This was not their first disagreement. Throughout their relationship, Vera had been frequently visiting Selos and drifting away from him. She even confessed to speaking with another person. In fact, she had ended her relationship with Vlad a month prior. He later discovered from a mutual friend that she was involved with Alexander, a resident of Selos. Although he had never met Alexander, when he confronted Vera, she acknowledged the relationship. At the time, they continued to cohabitate, but following their December 15 altercation, she left, taking some belongings with her. Despite their separation, they remained in contact by phone, and on January 12, 2020, he offered to assist her in relocating her remaining belongings to a new apartment. She agreed to meet him, and they scheduled a time for January 13th. They met in the afternoon, packed up both her belongings and his, since he too wanted to move out, and drank beer, lur, and vodka. They got drunk, but there was no conflict until he brought up the topic of their relationship and revealed that he knew about Alexander. She became enraged, swearing at him, insulting him, and starting to physically assault him, kicking him at least 5 times in the groin area and slapping him in the face at least 8 times. He only felt pain from the kicks, not the slaps. Vera instigated the physical fight, which made him angry because she had lied about not seeing another guy and was upset that he knew about her personal life. That was the testimony that Vlad told the police. Next, we'll discuss the other side of this story, which gives every reason to believe that Vlad was not honest in his testimony. Vera sent a voice message to her friend at 5:08 p.m. In the message, she mentioned that she was already at the apartment, packing her belongings. She expected to be settled into her new apartment around 6 p.m. and requested her friend's help to move her things from the taxi to the apartment. Just 3 minutes later, Vera sent a new voice message. She invited her friend to come to the apartment where she lived with Vlad and help her with the move. However, Vera did not have time to finish as Vlad intervened by saying, "No, no one's coming in here." So he was against Vera's friend coming to the apartment. It seems that the situation began to get out of control because 4 minutes later, at 5:15 p.m., Vera, in a low voice, asked her friend to come. It looks like this message was a call for help. She deliberately spoke in a low voice so that Vlad wouldn't hear her. At 5:25 p.m., Vera sends another voice message, and Vlad's dominant voice is heard again. He tells Vera's friend not to bother them and to wait for Vera to text her. At 7:19 p.m., Vlad recorded the voice message himself. From that moment on, Vera did not have access to her phone. She was left alone with the monster. But what happened next needs to be explained. At about 3 a.m., the neighbors from the same floor started waking up from the terrible screams coming from apartment 738. A witness called what was happening a massacre. The screams were so loud that 15 people gathered in the hallway near the apartment. Vlad's brother was among them, and he remembered Vlad's words and realized they needed to break down the door, since his brother had previously said that he would take Vera's life. The door to the apartment was made of iron, so the neighbors started looking for tools to force it open. All this time, Vera's heart-rending cries were coming from the apartment. People called the emergency service, and these calls eventually became part of a separate investigation. For 30 minutes, the police still weren't at the scene. It lasted until 6:30 a.m. During these 3.5 hours, people called the police, but no one came to Vera's aid. The witnesses made 7 calls to the emergency service while Vera was fighting for her life, but no one came. The last words they heard from behind the door were Vlad's. He said, "Vera, forgive me. I love you very much." In the end, the neighbors found a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down the door. By this time, Vera was already dead, and Vlad was in the bathroom. He was very drunk. While Vera was painfully dying at the hands of her former boyfriend, and the neighbors were trying in vain to get help from the police, the 112 operators were talking about life, laughing, drinking tea, and were very unhappy that they were being disturbed. The police arrived only after it became known that Vera had died. Later, they will claim that there was no gas in one car and that there were no available officers as everyone was busy with other calls. As a result, the 112 operators and the police officers on duty that night were on trial too. The video from the police station was published during the investigation, but there is no point in translating it into English. I can describe it in just one word: indifference, and it is clear even without subtitles. But Vlad claimed there were no conflicts between him and Vera until 5 a.m. However, the forensic examination showed that he lied. Vera received her first injury 6 hours before her death, that is, at about midnight. It meant that Vlad Kanyus was beating and injuring her for 6 hours until she took her last breath. Her body bore around 100 injuries, including stab wounds, a broken nose, and broken ribs. Strangulation marks were also visible on her neck. If the police's inaction shocked you, then be prepared for what comes next, which will be just as astonishing. More than 1,000 people gathered for Vera Pekteleva's funeral. The church could not accommodate everyone. According to Oksana, Vera's mother, the funeral home spent 4 hours trying to restore Vera's face with makeup, but she still could not recognize her daughter. That's how serious her injuries were. Meanwhile, Vlad Kanyus was telling the investigators his version of what happened. He of course tried to downplay his role in this crime. He said about that night that when he started talking to her about our relationship, he suggested they should get back together and told her that he knew she was seeing another guy. A conflict between them started. She didn't like it. After that, she started swearing, insulting him, and hitting him. Namely, she kicked him at least 5 times in the groin area and hit him in the face at least 8 times with her palm. He didn't feel any pain when she slapped him. However, when she kicked him between the legs, he experienced physical pain. That is, Vera started hitting him first. It made him angry. He was angry that she lied and said she wasn't dating another guy. At the same time, Vera said that he was prying into her personal life because he knew everything about her. During this time, she continued to insult him, and he got angry and hit her several times with his palms, about 4 times on the head, but the blows were of small force. When he hit Vera, she fell to the floor, hitting the closet. She was lying on her stomach. She also hit him back, namely, she beat his head with her palms and fists. It was painful. He asked her to stop, but she didn't stop. He remembered she scratched his back. Then he decided to take her by the neck. He saw an iron that was on the floor. He took this iron and wrapped the iron cord around Vera's neck. After that, he tightened the cord around her neck slightly. He squeezed her neck for 1.5 minutes or 2. At that moment, he didn't realize that he could kill Vera with his actions. He didn't want to kill Vera. He was tightening the cord around Vera's neck because he wanted to scare her. He wanted her to lose consciousness. He wanted her to fall asleep for 15 minutes. After he removed the cord from her neck, she started making sounds, coughing or wheezing. When he removed the cord from Vera's neck, she was in a prone position, but then he put her on her back. At that moment, she was unconscious. At the same time, she made sounds, that is, wheezed. He thought she was fine. After a while, he started waking Vera up, but she was unresponsive. Then, he started listening to whether her heart was beating. He put his ear to her mouth, then to her heart. She had no pulse, she wasn't breathing. He don't remember what happened next. He remembered that at some point, he ended up in the bathroom. At the same time, he had a knife in his hands. He took a knife with me because he wanted to hurt myself. He didn't want to live because he realized that Vera was dead. He didn't want to kill her. After some time, the door to the apartment opened, and his brother and a police officer were inside. After that, he was told to get dressed. He was taken to the police station. He's sorry for what he did. He do not deny that it was his actions that caused Vera's death. He didn't want to kill her. He wanted to apologize to Vera's family. As you have noticed, Vlad has a selective memory. He remembered strangling Vera, but did not remember how he inflicted about 100 injuries on her. It was also unclear how Vera could have punched him in the face and scratched his back while she was lying on her stomach on the floor. During the interrogation, it also became clear how Vlad's brother ended up at the crime scene. After all, he lived in another city. Here's what Vlad told the police about it. He called his brother. He told him about what happened. He told him that Vera wasn't breathing, and his brother told me to call an ambulance and give her CPR. He tried to give her first aid. He tried to give her CPR and cardiac massage. During the investigation, it became known that he called his brother at about midnight and said that he was going to take Vera's life. At the second interrogation, when asked again about the injuries on Vera's body, he replied, "It was probably me who caused those injuries to Vera." He did not count the number of his blows, but these injuries that were found on Vera's body by the expert may have been caused by me. He don't remember how many times he hit her, but he think it's the same number as indicated by the expert. He admit he caused her all the injuries indicated in the report. He wanted silence. He didn't think about her suffering. She screamed and insulted him during their conflict. He didn't enjoy hitting her, but he didn't like her screaming. He wanted her to shut up. He didn't think about her suffering at that time. Vlad Kanyus also said he had consensual, intimate relations with Vera that evening. The related charges were eventually dropped. It was difficult to prove the opposite. Police officers and emergency service operators were charged with negligence. It's hard to believe, but they were not suspended from work during the investigation and continued to provide ridiculous justifications. The prosecutor demanded real prison terms for all 5 defendants, but the judge decided otherwise. They received suspended sentences ranging from 1.5 to 2 years. The court also ordered each defendant to pay around $350 to the victims. Simultaneously, the police department had to pay approximately $111,000. The amounts have been converted from the Russian ruble to US dollars for easier understanding. The indictment states that the police officers had access to gasoline and should have taken appropriate measures to resolve the situation, but they did not consider it an urgent task. Both police officers refused to cooperate with the investigation and did not admit guilt. They claimed that when witnesses reported the woman's screams and cries for help, the investigation team was at another address where a man's corpse had been found. We may never know the full truth of what happened that night. Vera was not planning to stay in the apartment and had asked her friend for help with moving, suggesting that Vlad Kanyus may have forced her to consume alcohol when she was unconscious, then fabricated a story to make the event seem unintentional. In the summer of 2022, the court sentenced Vlad Kanyus to 17 years in prison, and he partially admitted his guilt. He was also ordered to pay around $45,000 in compensation. However, this verdict shocked Vera's parents, who planned to appeal, believing the punishment was too lenient. Surprisingly, Vlad Kanyus did not even serve a full year in prison. In November 2023, photos of him in military uniform appeared online, and in April 2023, it became known that he had received a presidential pardon after 6 months of participation in the ongoing armed conflict in Russia. He was also relieved of the obligation to pay any compensation to Vera's parents. Vera's case has caused widespread resonance in Russia, and the news about Vlad Kanyus's pardon has been equally controversial. The press secretary of the Russian president stated that there are specific procedures for granting pardons, including a confession of guilt by the convict and the possibility of redeeming oneself on the battlefield. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his formative years and received his education. At the age of 20, he made the decision to join the military, driven by a desire to defend his country. Christopher discovered his true calling and committed himself wholeheartedly to serving his nation with honor and unwavering dedication. As a guardian of the citizens' peace, this decision influenced the course of his life. Christopher was sent to a military base near the town of Marquette. There, on the military base not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they would see each other, and a mutual attraction arose at first sight. The young people often met on the streets of the city and felt too shy to greet each other, but over time, they began to walk together. Their communication became more and more frequent and intimate, and eventually it grew into a close friendship. For several years, they remained only close friends because Christopher's military service did not allow him to pursue a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer. In December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always maintained a proper relationship. After a short period, the lovers recognized that they shared numerous common interests: a deep appreciation for nature, a preference for a balanced lifestyle, and a yearning for serenity. This is why Iron River proved to be the ideal location for both of them. The couple reached the decision to cohabitate. Christopher relocated to live with Terry, secured employment at a factory manufacturing components for naval vessels, and before long, had subordinates reporting to him. Life was unfolding in the most favorable manner possible. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As they did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here, he found not only a job but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In this new city, Chris was about to begin his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment, after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was deeply concerned. She had tried reaching him for several days, and worried, she contacted their shared acquaintances, but they had no information. 10 days later, a distressed Terry filed a missing person report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was registered, but the police swiftly reassured Terry, stating that people occasionally vanish for a time before returning, sometimes even settling in other locations. At the police station, Terry also mentioned that Christopher had recently been offered a job in North Carolina, implying he may have made it to his new residence and chosen to start afresh, cutting ties with the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, surprisingly, no information could be obtained, as Christopher had not shown up for work for 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search teams ventured into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to assist in the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him, and perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, and closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife Kelly soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Reen, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages, but received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. the investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car. Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation involved interviewing Christopher's co-workers. The detectives visited the factory, where they spoke with employees and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors about this had been circulating for months. This new information piqued the investigators' interest, and they decided to re-interview the Cochran couple to clarify the nature of their relationship. Ultimately, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher had indeed been involved in an affair, but she was unable to disclose this previously due to her husband's presence. She explained that she and her husband Jacine have an open relationship, and Jacine is generally accepting of his wife's affairs. However, the topic was sensitive, and it may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers disputed Kelly's claims, stating that Jacine was strongly opposed to the affair, and there was no casual relationship in the Cochran family as Kelly had suggested. Jacine himself had a conversation with the police that revealed he was vehemently against his spouse's unfaithfulness, though this stance made him a suspect. However, the lack of decisive evidence made it impossible to determine that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance, and the officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jacine from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious case remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator, Jeremy Ogden, who immediately began actively working on it. Ogden's initial task was to thoroughly analyze the Cochran family's history. He learned that Kelly had met Jacine while still in high school, and they began living together immediately after graduation. The two had very different personalities. Kelly was socially adept and loved to talk, while Jacine was known for his reticence and taciturnity, only answering questions when asked. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married and started their own company providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest but brought them a decent income, with most of the work taken on by Jacine. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health, and he began to have back problems, feeling heavier and heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he was unable to continue the business, and Kelly took over all the work of running it. During this challenging time, Kelly sought ways to help her husband recover, and she discovered a plant that offered hope for Jacine's recovery. However, the use of this plant in medical practice had just begun, and it was prohibited in the state where they resided. The only option for Kelly and Jacine to obtain the drug was to relocate, and they decided to move to Iron River Township, Michigan in 2014. Here, Jacine was able to consult a doctor and receive a prescription for the remarkable plant, ultimately finding relief from his suffering. In early 2014, the couple found employment at a plant that specialized in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, where they worked alongside Christopher. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and she and Christopher became close friends, which was particularly important for Christopher, who had been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. The investigation continued, and after reviewing the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case for a search warrant of the Cochrans' home. The search uncovered a disturbing book by Jacine describing murder scenes, one matching Christopher's characteristics. Suspicions about Jacine grew, leading to another search, but the home was empty when police arrived. No one opened the door, and it turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jacine had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried, as they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples. The Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home, and the couple did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder, nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived to find Kelly in a panicked state, obstructing doctors. Jason was discovered dead, his face suggesting extreme overheating. Investigators uncovered a syringe at the home, but the forensic report revealed Jason's death was by strangulation, not drug abuse. This led to a re-examination of the evidence, with Kelly becoming the prime suspect in both her husband's murder and the disappearance of Christopher Reen. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, the young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. After learning about the tragic incident from Kelly herself, Walter quickly went to the police. He emphasized that illegal drugs could not have caused Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and Jason would have told him about any changes in his life. Additionally, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs to alleviate the persistent back pain he had been experiencing for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been going through a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his concerns with him, stating that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana due to suspicions from the Iron River police regarding their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had occurred had significantly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and attempted to take his own life, which necessitated intensive treatment. Walter also observed a noticeable change in his friend's conduct. Kelly started to exert more and more control over his life, and it seemed that Jason was continuously on edge, whereas previously, the boys could spend hours playing video games together. Jason now began to avoid social gatherings as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became a crucial piece in the investigation and enabled the investigators to comprehend the dynamics within the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Reen. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. While Walter accepted a difficult role, he was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea, which came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. Despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her, but she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, it suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators, mocking the justice system. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 hectic days filled with unease and upheaval, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to uncover the information that Kelly Cochran was located off the west coast of the United States. She had skillfully evaded the police and traveled to Kentucky, specifically to the town of Wingo, which is situated more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective notified the local law enforcement, advising that upon locating Kelly, they should apprehend her, exercising utmost caution due to her potential threat. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house, knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts. They acted quickly and without warning, and that afternoon, Kelly was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he continued interviewing the suspect, along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, the details became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Reen was much more complex and significant than everyone had initially believed. She genuinely loved him, and Kelly longed to escape this city and build a new life with him. However, everything changed on October 13th, 2015, when Jacine discovered her infidelity. They were fighting, and Jacine remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke, but Jacine was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jacine commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14, 2015, Christopher Reen arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy, as their encounter was while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan, and their evening promised to be special. But their solitude was interrupted by Jacine's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jacine, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jacine's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso, and the remains were placed in several trash bags and then disposed of by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jacine, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it. The opportunity for a crime came on February 22, 2016, when Jacine complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason, it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jacine by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with the police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill, littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects, one of which was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Reagan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Reen and Jacine Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession in court. However, she presented a different version, according to which she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day, caught the lovers off guard, and then grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jacine's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Reen. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jacine Cochran's case did not go to trial as a plea agreement was reached, and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where she is serving her sentence. Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her crimes. She claims that she and Jacine committed more crimes, and Christopher is just one of their many victims. However, the details, names, and additional crimes that Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jacine Cochran, in the hope that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Austin Harf. The case of Austin Harf, a handsome, high-achieving youth who turned into a cannibal. Experts say mental disorders can stem from genetics, trauma, substance abuse, or isolation. Harf's case stands out. He suffers from a rare condition where he believes he's transforming into an animal. But some think he feigned insanity to avoid responsibility, as he admitted using drugs for a long time. Now, let's explore how the scion of a wealthy and respected family, an honor student and an athlete, became a drug-dependent madman with an insatiable craving for human flesh. Austin Malcolm Harf, the Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996 in Palm Beach, Florida, to a prominent family of doctors. The Harf family lived in a lavish oceanfront residence, and a year and a half later, welcomed a daughter, Haley, with whom Austin shared a close bond. Despite their privileged upbringing, the children were not spoiled. Their parents provided them with quality education and supported their holistic growth and creative potential. Austin was an excellent student, passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and theater. He saw himself as creative and ambitious. Along with his family, he traveled the world. In high school, he described himself as a happy, optimistic person with a vivid imagination and perseverance in academics and sports, though he acknowledged his shyness. When Austin turned 13, his parents decided to separate. His father left the family home and moved into an equally luxurious residence with his new romantic partner, who soon became his wife. The children remained with their mother, but their father continued to be actively involved in their upbringing and provided financial support. Soon, Austin's mother also found a new partner, marrying him within a year, and he moved into their home. The teenage boy struggled with his parents' divorce, but it's worth noting that his emotional turmoil did not affect his academic performance or athletic achievements. Dreaming of a career in medicine to follow in his parents' footsteps, Austin aspired to help and save lives, aiming to gain admission to a prestigious college specializing in medical studies. He grew tall, boasted a muscular build, and was quite strong. His charming smile and innocent, open gaze gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he remained the same shy guy, which hindered his ability to socialize with peers and form romantic relationships with girls. In his personal diary, written during his teenage years, he expressed having almost no friends in school, as all his classmates labeled him a nerd and mocked him. He also expressed hope that everything would change for the better when he went to college, changed his social circle, and moved out of his parents' house. A few months before finishing high school, Austin discovered he had been admitted to the prestigious University of Florida's 4-year medical program. Successful completion of this program would open wide career prospects for him in the future, as well as the opportunity to continue his education at any medical school in the United States. The student was incredibly happy as his dream had come true. Towards the end of August, his parents drove him to the college campus where he was to begin his studies. Opening up in a vlog, Austin embarked on the independent adult life he had eagerly awaited, yet little changed for him. Due to his shyness, he still struggled to connect with his peers. He briefly dated a lovely girl, but they soon parted ways because, as she put it, something about his behavior alarmed her, leading her to end the relationship. In his first year of university, Austin took a serious interest in bodybuilding, spending a lot of time in the gym and achieving impressive results. He developed well-defined muscles that looked very impressive. However, his success was not solely the result of perseverance and hard work. The use of steroids, which he began using regularly, also played a role. He openly shared this in his vlog on YouTube, which he started in the spring of 2016. Austin posted various videos on his channel. Some discussed sports and bodybuilding in particular, while others featured him singing with a guitar, doing cover versions of popular hits, or mimicking famous artists by copying their performance style. Still others were about himself and his philosophical musings on life. Over time, however, his postings became increasingly alarming. He started urging his followers never to use steroids, claiming they could drive a person insane. He also said he had a volatile and unpredictable nature and was confused by his own behavior. Austin began recording videos speaking in different accents, as if they were different personas. At times, he would change the tone of his voice or suddenly burst into tears for no apparent reason. His mood and facial expressions also underwent strange transformations, at times appearing as if he was simply making faces at the camera. Later, experts who reviewed his postings concluded that in each one, he was virtually pleading for help. For him, this blog became the only outlet and a way to express his feelings, as he failed to make any real friends during his studies. Moreover, these video recordings traced how the student gradually lost his sanity, with his behavior becoming more sensational, provocative, and even aggressive. Austin's subscribers suspected he was under the influence of controlled substances while recording his videos. They directly asked him about this in the comments, but he replied that it would be unhealthy and, as an athlete, he would never use drugs. However, his behavior suggested otherwise, and one of the subscribers even speculated that Austin might have a dissociative identity disorder. When Austin returned home for the summer break, his mother and sister, who hadn't seen him in almost a year and hadn't watched his blog online, were literally shocked by the changes in him. During that time, Austin had undergone a significant physical transformation, turning into a veritable mountain of muscle. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. He became odd in every sense, speaking nonsense and claiming he no longer needed sleep. Initially, his family didn't take his words seriously until the night came. Austin declared he would patrol the house, guarding his family's peace from some dark forces, and he indeed kept his promise, wandering around the house until morning. Moreover, every hour he would check on his mother and sister's rooms, loudly assuring them they could sleep peacefully because he was on duty. The next morning, Austin's mother decided to have an honest conversation with him. She directly asked if he was using any drugs. Austin candidly admitted that he had tried virtually all drugs over the past year, and he even described how each one affected him. Among other things, he had taken a potent synthetic drug that caused severe hallucinations, fits of rage, and could lead to a fatal overdose. Nevertheless, he swore to his mother that it was all in the past, and he no longer touched the poison that had driven him insane. After hearing her son out, Mrs. Austin made what was perhaps the main mistake. She did not seek help from qualified professionals, deciding she could help her son cope on her own, being an experienced pharmacist. She took matters into her own hands. She gave her son a sedative and a sleeping pill, thinking it would help him relax and fall asleep after a sleepless night. However, Austin, after dozing off for just a couple of hours, was back on his post by night. He resumed patrolling the house until morning, informing its inhabitants every hour that all was quiet and there was no need to worry. This went on for several weeks. But the mother still refused to involve psychiatrists or even inform her ex-husband about the situation. Early in the morning of August 13th, Austin knocked on the door of a former classmate who lived a few blocks away. She was quite surprised since they hadn't seen each other in over a year, and he hadn't warned her of his visit. When she asked the reason for his appearance, Austin said he had forgotten what year he was born and urgently needed this information. The puzzled classmate answered that it was in 1996, after which he abruptly turned around and left without a word. Austin's stunt scared and puzzled Bushi, so she immediately called Mrs. Hariff and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using prohibited substances. Only then did she decide to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and share her concerns that something was seriously wrong with their son. The boy's father flew to Florida the next day, and after talking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for an examination, to which he categorically refused. Then he had a heart-to-heart conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send their son for compulsory examination and subsequent treatment in a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they were unable to do so in time. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach. Given the hot and sunny weather, his mother insisted that Haley go along to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing, but dressed unusually warm for the beach, as if he was going to the mountains instead. He wore a thick athletic hoodie with long sleeves, matching pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him dressed like that, they were initially silent, then burst into laughter a few seconds later. They teased Austin, asking why he was dressed that way and if everything was okay with him. Austin became seriously angry, shouting that if they thought he was crazy, then he would act accordingly and end one of their lives. The boys didn't take his words seriously but backed off just to be safe. Haley noticed her brother was on the verge of a breakdown, so she decided to talk to him and calm him down. During their conversation, unheard by the others, Austin told his sister that he wasn't entirely human, but half wild animal, immortal, and possessed superhuman strength. His words frightened her, but she tried to remain calm to avoid provoking aggression from her brother. At the beach, Austin behaved in an entirely normal and natural manner. He joked, laughed, played volleyball with friends, and goofed around. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes, and everyone went their separate ways. Austin and Haley headed towards a small restaurant near the coast, where they planned to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he intended to test his immortality, then proceeded towards a busy highway, planning to cross it in an irresponsible manner, directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she ran after her brother and physically dragged him away, begging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't make anyone wait and silently followed his sister. At dinner, Austin behaved oddly again, silently getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he feared someone, and then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin jumped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, shoved his father hard, and ran out of the restaurant. What unfolded after he left the restaurant could be straight out of a horror movie. He later claimed to have no recollection of the events and found it hard to believe he was capable of such cruelty. Austin walked several miles until he stumbled into an unfamiliar neighborhood. There, the bright light from an open garage caught his attention, and he made his way towards it. In that home lived 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkan Stevens. In the evenings, they enjoyed barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage that was set up like a living room. They had been married for over 25 years, had 3 adult children living independently, and were now enjoying their retirement and each other's company. That evening, John went for a walk with their dog while his wife Michelle prepared everything for their usual movie night. When Michelle saw an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no immediate threat and even asked if he needed assistance, but the situation then took an unexpected turn. Their neighbor, Jeffrey Pfizer, lived across the street and was on friendly terms with the Stevens. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside, and looking into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw a tall, large young man attacking the elderly woman by the open garage. Jeffrey tried to pull the stranger away, but the stranger was overpoweringly strong, knocking Jeffrey to the ground. As Jeffrey tried to recover, the assailant stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens house to draw the attacker's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, he headed to his own home. Only once inside did he realize the assailant had not followed him, but returned to the unfortunate Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife, and that he had been injured along with his elderly neighbor. After speaking with emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening intently. Soon, he was convinced no one was outside his door, and the attacker had stayed at the neighbor's home. Moreover, the assailant was now making strange animal-like sounds, similar to the growling of a wild beast, accompanied by screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive at the scene, but by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that greeted them was horrifying and beyond any logical explanation. 2 officers approached the garage, weapons drawn, only to freeze in disbelief at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of the homeowner, Michelle Mishkan Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground, but it took a moment for the officers to process the scene. One man reached out, pleading for help in a strained voice. Above him was another man, seemingly choking him, gripping his neck with one hand and tilting his head back with the other. The officers demanded the attacker release the victim, threatening with their guns, but he showed no reaction. Firing was too risky due to the chance of hitting both individuals. Instead, one officer pulled out a taser, warned he was about to use it, and moved closer. Only then did he see the assailant was not just attacking, but actually biting victim's face, holding his head and neck firmly. The victim, as you might have guessed, was John Stevens. Beneath him spread a vast pool of blood. His left cheek was missing a chunk of flesh, and his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. The elderly man was immobilized, barely able to move, silently begging for help. The officer shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at the victim's face with his teeth. A kick to the assailant's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Subsequent kicks did little to deter him. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog, which was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto the assailant's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented the attacker long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, he claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Mrs. Stevens could not be revived, and her husband succumbed to his injuries on the way to the hospital due to extensive blood loss from stab wounds and the shock of having his flesh consumed. The injured neighbor who reported the incident survived but suffered permanent minor motor skill damage to his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. As for the attacker, he slipped into a coma after ingesting a substance from a bottle in the garage that he mistook for alcohol, which turned out to be a potent substance. The perpetrator suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach, spent several days on the brink of life and death, but was ultimately saved by medical professionals. Austin spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma before he finally regained consciousness and was able to give his account, claiming he remembered nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall the dinner at the restaurant and the argument with his father, after which he walked away. He then described seeing a ghost-like figure that led him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods, until a light appeared in the distance, which turned out to be a lantern near the Stevens garage, where the homeowner was preparing a barbecue and taking out food. When his presence startled the homeowner, she called for help. Austin admitted to striking her several times and then drawing a knife, declaring he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor, Jeffrey Fisher, attacked him, whom Austin perceived as a demon, and he retaliated with the knife. After Fisher ran to seek help, Austin continued to assault the homeowner until she showed no signs of life. He then noticed a bottle, mistook its contents for alcohol, and drank about half. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. The homeowner had returned, shocked by the scene. Austin claimed no memory of what happened next. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of potent narcotics, which might explain his aggression and insensitivity to pain. However, when he was tested at the hospital, his blood showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol, leading to the conclusion that Austin might have had a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Determining the truth of this claim was left to experienced psychiatrists. Between the courtroom and psychiatric care, the case of Austin Harif gained widespread media attention due to its unprecedented brutality and ambiguity. The children of the deceased couple, as well as the relatives of the injured neighbor, were convinced that he was feigning insanity and memory lapses in order to be declared incompetent and avoid severe punishment, a sentiment shared by the majority of those following the case. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, noted in his report that Mr. Harif's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the death of 2 people. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of committing the crime. There were suggestions that his mental health had deteriorated due to his experiments with various narcotics, steroid use, and difficulties in socializing with peers, which he had experienced since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was clean, with no traces of illegal substances or alcohol found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his aggressive behavior lay elsewhere. During one of the court hearings, Austin's father revealed that there was at least one confirmed case of schizophrenia in their family, and he feared that this severe illness had been passed on to his son. It's worth noting that the student was suspected of having a rather rare disorder known as clinical lycanthropy delusion, which could explain why he behaved like a wild beast and was impervious to pain. But none of the psychiatrists examining the defendant confirmed this diagnosis. After treatment, Austin was transferred to jail, but the case remains unresolved to this day. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers insist that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of the victim and the injured man have expressed hope in interviews that Harif will be found competent and sentenced to death for his heinous acts. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. In the spring of 2016, in the peaceful town of Fort Worth, there was a brutal and cynical murder that even surprised the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Poulet Arellano, who worked as a paramedic. It is shocking to discover who her executioner was. The circumstances surrounding the tragic incident were quite puzzling, leading the police to initially consider the possibility that Elizabeth may have passed away of her own volition. However, this theory was contradicted by the accounts provided by accidental witnesses who observed the horrific scene. The investigation required extensive efforts to thoroughly understand the events and bring the perpetrator to justice. Despite the brutality of the crime committed, many felt that the sentence imposed was overly lenient and unjust. Elizabeth Poulet Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young and showed no interest in the fate of his daughter, not contacting her in any way. Soon, her mother Juanita remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. She studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a man named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon entered a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents. But they did not interfere with their romance, because the chosen partner seemed to them a serious and quite reliable man. At the age of 16, shortly after finishing school, Elizabeth married her partner. Legally, the couple had 4 children, one after the other, 3 sons and a daughter. However, despite the presence of multiple heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a homemaker. She recalled her childhood aspiration, so Elizabeth completed medical school and secured employment as a paramedic with the intention of pursuing further education to become a physician. The young woman was kind and devout, raised in the Christian faith. She took her children to church regularly, instilling in them a love and compassion for their fellow human beings. Family and friends described her as a very caring person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph appeared strong and happy, but after 13 years of living together, this union began to show signs of strain. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife earlier, trying to control every aspect of her life, but over time, his behavior became simply intolerable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to her parents' house. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his outbursts of anger. Additionally, she did not want the children to listen to their parents' arguments almost every day, so she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits and, in order to distract herself from family problems and the impending divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So on the evening of April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old woman, accompanied by her friends, went to a fun place. There she danced and enjoyed herself, but did not consume any alcohol because she intended to drive home in her own car, which she had used to arrive at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. After parking the car, she called her friend with whom she had spent the evening at the club and told her that she had already reached home and was doing fine. Elizabeth then hung up the phone but never went inside the house. The next morning, Juanita, her mother, was very worried when she found that her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned a long time ago. Elizabeth could not have left somewhere without informing anyone, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was not locked. The key remained in the ignition, and her daughter's purse and phone lay on the vacant seat. Naturally, she could not leave her personal effects unattended in the unlocked vehicle, implying something dreadful had transpired. She promptly contacted the authorities, reporting a missing person. The police were confident they could swiftly resolve the matter, as they say, while fresh. Furthermore, there was still hope Elizabeth was alive, as the car showed no signs of blood or struggle. Yet, the situation was far from straightforward. The investigation started by meticulously reconstructing the timeline of events on the evening and night in question, tracing Elizabeth's entire route to find and question all potential witnesses, beginning with the friends and colleagues she had spent time with before her disappearance. They provided the exact time when she returned home, and later Elizabeth herself had called to confirm her safe arrival. Additionally, several calls and messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, who had repeatedly attempted to reach her that night, were found on the missing person's phone, but Elizabeth had not responded to any of them. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to him, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Arellano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight, he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. He assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years, and she was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of Elizabeth, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. He said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4:30 in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so he could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found, walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash, and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Arellano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then, a theory was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily, against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable, because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. However, the question remained as to who, and for what reason, could have so brutally murdered a mother of many children. Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone could have been guarding her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of Elizabeth, Rudolph, continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the list of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, Rudolph displayed an emotional performance, weeping at the coffin of his ex-wife and expressing a desire to be in her place or die alongside her. According to his sister, Elizabeth, he even believed the sincerity of his own words. Additionally, Rudolph actively assisted in the establishment of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. The investigation determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near Elizabeth's house, and it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which she had been thrown. When the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions became even more complex. It turned out that he made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's workplace, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages, trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son, who stated that he had seen the rope removed from his mother's neck earlier in the backyard of his father's house, and recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before. The investigation found that Rudolph waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete, and then drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death, and then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. In January 2019, Arellano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke differently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of Elizabeth woman's children. Even though Elizabeth is no longer here, everyone in her family and community will always remember her. She was a lovely, lovely mother. I want to say a lovely daughter too. She was basically my daughter. She had the ultimate respect for me, as I did for her, said her stepfather Fidel Galvan in 2016. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Stephen Freeman. The victim, Stephen Andrew Freeman, was born on January 1, 1995, in Thomason, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up as happy, healthy children without any problems with their parents or society. Kind and responsive, Stephen had many friends, and everyone described him as an exceptionally calm and balanced person. Stephen grew up in Griffin, where he later attended Spalding High School and Gordon State College to complete his education. Mary Catherine Higdon was also raised in a respectable family, somewhat carefree, impetuous, humorous, and friendly. She was drawn to creativity. She often put on mini plays and performed them in front of her family and neighbors. Mary and Stephen fell in love with each other in their senior years and have been inseparable since. The young couple had a lot of common interests. Both loved being in nature. They went hiking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Stephen Freeman updated his Facebook status to indicate he was in a relationship and regularly shared various photos with his partner. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend, and Steve's parents also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young couple moved in together. Stephen got a job as a plumber at Drain W Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary Catherine worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time as a sales associate at a gun store. By the summer of 2018, Stephen and Mary had been living together for 7 years but had not gotten married. On August 1st, 2018 at 10:42 p.m., emergency services received an alarm call. The caller, 24-year-old Mary Catherine Higdon, screamed hysterically into the phone that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She reported grabbing a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that there was a bullet in the chamber. When paramedics and police arrived at Sunnybrook Drive, she was in a state of shock. She knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried. Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Stephen Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped. Not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred and still in shock, Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where she, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home, and that Stephen would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Stephen the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Stephen Freeman was the love of her life, and she would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered about. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story improbable and continued the investigation, examining the evidence. Mary Catherine was called in for a second interrogation, where the investigators used aggressive tactics. They yelled at her, expressed skepticism about her account, and demanded the truth. This approach was effective, and Mary Catherine confessed to shooting her boyfriend in a fit of anger. She explained that they had a heated argument and she wanted to leave him. The investigators had recorded the conversation and obtained a confession, indicating a case that had been resolved. However, a significant technical issue arose, resulting in the loss of most of the recording, with only background interference and indistinct noises remaining. The reason for this loss and the lack of a backup copy of this crucial evidence remained unexplained. Further investigation revealed that the pistol could not have been fired accidentally, as it required a deliberate trigger pull. Additionally, for the bullet to have struck Stephen in the way it did, the pistol had to have been pointed directly at the victim. Detectives also closely examined Mary's behavior, with some suspecting that she may have been overacting and exaggerating her distress. The detectives remained diligent, carefully piecing together their theory of the tragedy based on the emerging evidence and proof. Another critical fact cast doubt on the accident in Mary Catherine's words. Investigators learned that she worked at a gun store, where employees undergo thorough training on handling various firearms before starting work. This meant she undoubtedly knew how to safely hand over a pistol without causing harm. The picture of an accident didn't align with the new facts that the investigation uncovered. She changed her statement several times, and her hysterical state sometimes interrupted the interrogation. However, she reiterated that it was an accident. In another conversation, Mary Catherine told the police that at Stephen's request, she tossed the pistol to hand it to him, and the weapon accidentally discharged. This did not match what she had told the investigators at the scene and during the first interrogation, where she repeatedly stated that she was simply handing Stephen the pistol hand to hand, not tossing it, and that's when it accidentally fired below his neck. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt or concealment. Mary was detained and held in the Spalding County Jail during her trial. She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm while committing a crime. Lieutenant Wilson strongly disputed Mary's claim that it was an accident and tried to prove that her actions were a deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point, the magazine must have been emptied, bullets were loaded, and the pistol was then placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she was indeed preparing dinner for Stephen that evening, and the dinner found scattered on the kitchen floor explained the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Stephen and Mary, until their relationship nearly ended and then reignited with new passion. It became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often argued over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a dramatic event, screaming at Stephen and attacking him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Stephen to frustration. The guy shared with friends that during arguments and fights, Mary pointed a pistol at him or herself, threatening to end her life or his. Stephen never reported this to the police, fearing Mary would be jailed. And this was not the only instance when Mary resorted to using a weapon. There were plenty of weapons in their home. During an interrogation, Stephen's friend Thomas Skinner shared that 2 days before the tragedy on July 30th, 2018, Stephen and Mary Catherine exchanged warm messages, wishing each other a good day. The next day, July 31st, Stephen told his mother that he would not return home to that devil, and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Stephen didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Stephen's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road, and rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act driven by Mary Catherine's anger. However, her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Stephen's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pleaded guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Stephen because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently, repeatedly claiming it was an accident and that she loved Stephen Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her, claiming he hit her twice and even forced himself on her on the day of the tragedy, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Stephen often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately. Allegedly, on the night of the incident, when Stephen Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and shot at him. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that physical evidence supported the claim that Mary Catherine shot Stephen in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. The evidence presented included the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Stephen lay bleeding. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence, indicating that Stephen was not attacking Mary but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the blood stains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Stephen was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, the blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's theory was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment, and finally believing in the gravity of the situation, Mary Catherine made the risky decision to provide truthful testimony. With tears in her eyes, in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Stephen Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant and presented specific evidence. She managed to do so, and the defense stuck to the self-defense narrative. They presented the argument that a scandal had erupted between Mary and Stephen on the evening of the tragedy, where Mary fired at him in self-defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Stephen had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Stephen, she experienced all kinds of imaginable pressure: verbal insults, physical attacks, and even assault. He constantly controlled and manipulated her, needing to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, how she was spending money, and even what she was eating. He drove her to despair with unreasonable jealousy. She never reported him to the police because she loved and feared him. The defense presented ample evidence to support their claims. This included not just text messages taken from Mary's old phone, but also correspondence that raised significant questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in this relationship. The text messages, dating back over a year and a half between Mary and Stephen, not only proved Stephen's harsh behavior towards Mary Catherine, but also Mary's infidelity. Some message excerpts showed Stephen insulting Mary Catherine with harsh words and threatening her with repercussions upon his return from fishing. However, the reason for his anger was that, as confirmed by his friends, he was very angry with his girlfriend for being unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine shared that Stephen had sexually assaulted her twice, and she feared he would harm her again on August 1, 2018, leading her to act in self-defense. The defense called an expert witness and close relatives of Mary who could attest to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, testified affirmatively, stating she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting. She expressed regret for not photographing the injuries and believing Mary's explanation that it happened accidentally. A tearful Mary Higdon explained to the jury that on the night of the incident, she decided to break up with Stephen, telling him to leave the house. Stephen became angry and attacked her, and in self-defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand and accidentally fired. After Mary Catherine's emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense engaged in a fierce battle with Stephen's former friends who had been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend. Thomas Skinner, Stephen's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, while portraying Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed that over the last few years, Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship had become toxic, with her threatening to end her life whenever Stephen tried to leave her, and on one occasion, pointing a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Stephen's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine would obsessively call Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. In Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she omitted a crucial detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard pointed out. Mary extensively discussed their troubled relationship and how, after years of harmony, it had deteriorated into physical abuse. However, she never mentioned the moment when she pulled the trigger in supposed self-defense. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard remained unconvinced by Mary's account, noting that during cross-examination, Mary never once mentioned any harsh treatment by Stephen. Repeatedly, the prosecutor asked Mary Catherine whether a woman feeling safe at home would pursue her assailant late at night to bring him back. The answer was unsatisfactory, and the prosecutor continued, vividly describing the accidental shooting. Kate Lenhard picked up the pistol and recreated the scene as she envisioned it. According to her theory, Stephen came home, and after hearing Mary out, they argued, and he refused to have dinner. Enraged, Mary scattered the prepared food around the kitchen. Stephen, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed, likely waiting for her to calm down. But Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck on the left side. Since he hadn't turned to face her in her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Stephen Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Stephen Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting, hence he couldn't have been attacking Mary Higdon. Mary claimed they kept the gun in the house unloaded, but detectives suspected that the pistol was indeed loaded in advance on the evening of August 1, 2018, when Mary was preparing a rope for Stephen. This was the only explanation for how grease marks not only got on part of the slide but also inside the pistol. Did Mary Catherine really load the pistol in advance? Colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances of Stephen Freeman unanimously testified that he was not prone to aggression. Prosecutors also pointed out that Mary Catherine Higdon changed details of her story at least 10 times since the first interrogation, attributing such changes to fear. Mary Catherine refused a plea deal as she could have been facing the death penalty. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity to her. After hearing all witnesses and the accused, the case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Stephen Freeman's phone, checking his text messages and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Besides Mary's lies, no sufficient evidence was presented against her. The arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris had an effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict, not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. The defendant was found not guilty on the first charge of malicious action and not guilty on the second charge of serious action. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked, watching the person who took her son's life walk out of the courtroom. Jennifer Freeman could barely contain her anger towards the jurors, and everyone who supported Stephen's family was also stunned by such a verdict. After the trial ended in her favor, Mary Catherine returned home to be with her family in Griffin. Since then, she has stayed out of the limelight and is almost absent from social media, likely to avoid undue attention from the media and the public. Her Instagram profile is private, and no further details about her current whereabouts are known. It's assumed that Mary Catherine has moved on from her harrowing past to live a quiet and unnoticeable life. Stephen Freeman's mother dedicated a farewell post to her son on social media. Stephen lived a life filled with love, joy, compassion, and loyalty. Everyone was his friend, and those who enjoyed hunting and fishing with him were his closest. He had a heart of gold and a charming southern smile. Stephen showed his love for you by making you feel like you were the only person in the world, making you laugh until your stomach hurt, always smiling broadly, hugging you, and never leaving your side. These 3 simple words, "I love you," have always inspired me. So who really pulled the trigger in this story? That's a question you must answer for yourself, as all the answers in this story are evident by analyzing and presenting the situation. It's up to everyone to decide whether Mary Catherine is guilty or if it was a tragic accident that cost a young man his life. How much do you agree with the 2 jurors who changed the course of a young woman's life, giving her a second chance? Mary Catherine likely lives a quiet life away from the spotlight now that she has managed to leave her terrible past behind. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sierra Lamar. The story begins in Fremont, California. Sierra Lamar's family, consisting of her father Steve, a computer expert, her mother Marlene, and her older sister Danielle, lived in Fremont. Sierra was born on October 19, 1996, while Danielle was around 4 years her senior. The family experienced some common ups and downs. It was later discovered that when Danielle and Sierra were younger, their father Steve had engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with one of their school classmates during a sleepover. This led to his 1-year imprisonment. Despite Steve's prior convictions, Sierra and Danielle said they got along well with him and that he had always been a kind and respected father. However, after the incident, Steve and Marlene decided to end their relationship. Marlene eventually decided to relocate from Fremont to Morgan Hill, a city located approximately 40 miles southwest of Fremont. She made this move together with Sierra and her boyfriend, Rick Gardner. Sierra was initially disappointed to be leaving her close friends and hobbies behind, but she eventually settled in at her new school, made new friends, and even rejoined the cheerleading squad. On March 11, 2012, Sierra called her parents in Fremont to update them on her progress. The discussion was mostly joyful, as she was enthusiastic about one of her upcoming school tasks and mentioned wanting to get her hair colored. The next time she went to Fremont, she told her sister all about her homework. She was obviously doing quite well in her academics. Sierra ended the chat with Danielle and Steve shortly after dinner because it was a Thursday, she had school the next day, and it was getting late. They all agreed to part ways for the evening and promised to speak again soon. However, none of them realized that this would be Danielle and Steve's final conversation with Sierra. February 16, 2012, it was an ordinary workday back in Morgan Hill. The Gardner-Lamar family got ready for the day as usual around 6 in the morning. Rick awoke to head out to work shortly after, and Marlene arrived to kiss Sierra on the forehead before heading out to work as well. Sierra had to get ready for school and lock the house. At this point, at 6:29 a.m., she texted a friend before putting on her shoes and walking out the front door to catch the bus. Pito Hispanic Court was situated far from Sierra's high school and the rest of Morgan Hill. Sierra had to cross a deserted road between Palm and Dory Avenues every morning to catch the bus, just like many other children across America. While on her way at 7:11 a.m., she texted a friend to see if they could meet up before classes started. But when her school bus arrived at 7:15 a.m., just 4 minutes later, Sierra was not present. Sierra may have skipped class or even the entire school day because she didn't meet up with her friend. Her friends found it unusual that she didn't show up, but they didn't think it was wise to inform the school without her. The day proceeded as normal. Marlene routinely contacted Sierra after school to check on her, but found it unusual that her phone went straight to voicemail. However, she did not become worried. But when Marlene arrived home and saw that her daughter's room was still unoccupied, she realized that something was amiss. She contacted Steve to check if Sierra was planning to visit him in Fremont again. Unfortunately, this was not the case. When Sierra called Danielle and a few of her friends, they all left the same message. Marlene started to panic when she called Sierra's high school and found out that Sierra had missed all her classes. After calling the authorities, officers were sent immediately to Pito Hispanic Court. However, since Sierra could have disappeared at any time, there was no clear starting point for the investigators. Those closest to Sierra, including several of her friends, were questioned first, and they were all very honest about the predicament that Sierra and her family were facing. Even though she was usually content, it had only been a few months since her mother's divorce had compelled her to leave her family and all of her old friends behind. Authorities believed that because she frequently made lighthearted and even serious comments about returning to Fremont, she had most likely left voluntarily. Despite the fact that the police downplayed Sierra's disappearance, other factors were moving in the exact opposite direction. She not only said nothing, but she also stopped posting anything to her social media accounts. She never arrived at the front door, her phone was off, and all calls went to voicemail. Naturally, Sierra's loved ones and friends were terrified. Thus, the massive search for Sierra Lamar got underway. Despite the police's ineffective attempts, the trail of evidence related to Sierra's disappearance is currently one of the longest, most intricate, and most fascinating cases I've ever covered. The investigation began on Sunday morning, 2 days after she vanished. Data forensics were examining the previous data from her phone when they discovered that it had sent a signal without any electrical activity in the middle of the night. The phone appeared to have been turned on briefly before being turned off again, and the coordinates on the phone led them to a field near Sierra's house. At dawn, a search team carefully combed through the fields where the phone had been detected, and after just a few minutes, they found it. The Samsung Galaxy that Sierra had been using was located near the road, and it had sustained significant physical damage. It was assumed that her phone had likely been thrown off the road. Investigators concluded that she had not turned on her phone that evening. Instead, they reasoned that the rain had caused a false signal, briefly activating her phone. What a fortunate coincidence. This was the conclusion of the story, which heavily relied on the authorities finding the woman's phone. The events that occurred were caused by a raindrop and a short circuit. Given the nature and circumstances of the case, the detectives found the possibility of the woman's phone being thrown from a moving vehicle to be particularly concerning, considering the lack of footprints, tire tracks, or any other visual evidence. The next day brought about yet another horrifying discovery. 2 kilometers from Sierra's house, a search crew found her backpack thrown just outside a barn. She had expected to go to school and was probably pushed away from her own essential items as the bag included her schoolwork, inhaler, and money. Sadly, things only get worse from here. Additionally, a complete outfit, possibly the one she was wearing the morning she vanished, was found in her luggage. This ensemble included her pullover, pants, socks, shoes, and even undergarments. Her outfit was subjected to DNA testing, and the results were revealed. Her pants contained male foreign DNA, which suggested that she had likely been assaulted. Although the search had already intensified significantly in the days following Sierra's disappearance, the discovery of her phone and clothing sparked a fresh outpouring of local and international sympathy. Authorities received more than 1,000 fresh tips, and officers worked more than 7,000 hours. Several search teams were composed of more than 800 people. They examined every available lake and reservoir in the area, methodically combed over fields, and looked inside abandoned buildings. Sierra's name was a hot topic in the community, and posters for missing people were put up all over the place. Additionally, Sierra's parents offered a $10,000 reward to anyone with credible proof. However, despite their best efforts and those of the community, only a golf ball and a flipper were discovered. Investigators were closing in on a culprit, though the public was unaware. 12 days after Sierra's disappearance, DNA on her pants matched a local man. All 57 registered sex offenders in the area were investigated, and Sierra's father was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Anlin Garcia Torres, a 21-year-old man with a troubled past, emerged as a suspect after a successful DNA match. The suspicious relationship between Sierra and Anlin caused detectives to place him under constant watch. Nobody knew if Sierra was still alive or not, but Anlin was the most likely to know at this specific moment. The officers thus took a number of steps to keep an eye on his whereabouts and means of communication. His phone was tapped, a GPS tracker was covertly placed in his car, and 2 undercover police investigators shifted into an RV next to his house. After finding that the RV park had cameras at the front door, investigators also started looking through security footage from the neighborhood around Anlin. They examined this film on the day of her disappearance to determine whether Anlin had left or arrived home. At 7 a.m. on the morning Sierra vanished, Anlin's travel time of 7 miles from his home to Sierra's was a perfect match for the period during which Sierra could have been kidnapped, even though Anlin had departed for work at his normal time. Safeway's shift records showed that Anlin did not show up for work on March 16th. When his management inquired further, they discovered additional unfavorable information about Anlin. It turns out that just 3 years prior, 3 unsuccessful kidnapping attempts had occurred in this Safeway's parking lot. Thankfully, none of the perpetrators were ever formally recognized or detained. The only piece of evidence from each of these attempted kidnappings was a taser that the perpetrator had dropped. One of its batteries had a fingerprint on it. However, it was only a partial fingerprint, and only a direct 1-to-1 comparison could match it. The theory of Anlin being the suspect seemed plausible, but when Anlin's fingerprints were compared to those on the taser, a startling realization emerged. In reality, Anlin was the suspect. The suspect was now in the hands of the investigators. He was positively identified as being present when Sierra vanished. His DNA was discovered on her pants, and he has a history of involvement in kidnappings. This was sufficient to detain him, question him, and seize his automobile for DNA testing. In spite of Anlin's arrogance during the interview, the test results were unfavorable for him. He stated that the day Sierra vanished, he went fishing, that he had no idea who Sierra was, and that he was certain they would not discover anything. However, Anlin did not end his interview before making a very peculiar revelation. Anlin admitted to having the somewhat vile habit of masturbating while driving and disposing of the used tissue out the window. Additionally, he asserted that he had tossed out a used tissue in the precise spot where Sierra's bag was discovered on the morning she vanished. The cops didn't believe his absurd explanation. Anlin Garcia Torres was formally detained on May 21, 2012, in connection with the disappearance of Sierra Lamar, outside of his place of employment in a Safeway parking lot. This resulted from a number of distinct linkages between Ciara and Annalyn's vehicle. Her DNA was found on the interior door handle of the car's rear door, according to a DNA examination. Additionally, fibers from Annalyn's car seats matched those found on Ciara's clothing, and a piece of rope discovered inside his car included a hair strand from Ciara. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that she had been in his car at some point. But even after his arrest, the situation still had a serious flaw. Even though it might have looked evident what had happened to Ciara, her body had yet to be discovered. Could they really accuse Annalyn of first-degree murder in the absence of a body or a death that had been verified? Yes, in reality. Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen said on May 19, 2014, that he would be requesting the death penalty against Annalyn, although Annalyn had previously entered a plea of not guilty to killing Ciara. There was little to no room for error given the overwhelming body of evidence that pointed to his guilt. All the way to the end, after being delayed, Annalyn's trial finally got underway on January 30, 2017. The trial was drawn out and stressful for all parties, with long arguments from the prosecution and defense during the more than 13 weeks of testimony. The defense team for Annalyn tried to argue that his exposure to pesticides from surrounding fields as a child may have psychologically affected his cognitive capacities, and therefore, the crime was not his fault. They considered this to be an interesting aspect of the trial. Additionally, they argued that he shouldn't be eligible for the death penalty because he had nothing to do with the toxic exposure. And under those circumstances, they claimed that this was a deficit he faced, which other people did not. In a last-ditch effort, Annalyn's defense team asked for a new trial after casting doubt on the reliability and honesty of the chief investigator and asserting that he had tampered with evidence in the past. This motion, though, was turned down. The jury convicted Annalyn Garcia Torres of Ciara Lamar's first-degree murder. On May 9, 2017, the evidence was so overwhelming against Annalyn that he was unable to escape responsibility for his acts, even though Ciara's body has never been located and her death has not been proven. Ciara's mother addressed him directly in court and declared, "I find it inconceivable to do a horrific, violent crime. You have hurt both our family and your family deeply. You have taken away from Ciara what God has in store for her, but you also have the option to repent and let us know where she is. I often reflect on her and what has been taken away from me as a mother. Simply put, it's difficult to accept that this took place, though it's reality. I still assume it's a dream when I wake up every morning." As numerous of Ciara's kin read letters to him in the courtroom, Annalyn remained quiet and motionless, and he has continued to insist that he is innocent. It follows that he has never said where Ciara's body might be, and regrettably, nobody knows what exactly happened to her on the day that she vanished. Outside the evidence offered, Annalyn was formally given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after being spared the death penalty. Since his sentencing, Annalyn has remained largely silent and, despite receiving hundreds of letters from news organizations and total strangers, has only answered one letter. In this letter, Annalyn wrote, "I maintain my innocence, and I'm not going to discuss the matter." This letter is sent to a news reporter from Krone 4. "I do not trust the news, as there is a lot of selective reporting that presents an often inaccurate picture. Like many others, I believe everyone has a right to be heard, but sadly, those times are long gone." Actually, I'm not sure why Annalyn continues to maintain his innocence, as this is as obvious as day because of his DNA on Ciara's possessions, Ciara's DNA in his car, his prior criminal history, and a precise timeline. At least it was crystal clear that he was involved in Ciara's disappearance. There is no way she would still be missing if she were still alive, claim friends and family. Over a period of 3 years, volunteers carried out over 100 searches within a 15-meter radius, putting in a combined 50,000 man-hours of search effort in search of any information about the missing young woman. Even now, volunteers continue to search desperately for Sierra Lamar. The majority of them are aware that Sierra is probably deceased, but they still want to return her to her family and provide them with the closure they need. Nobody is certain where Sierra's body may be at this time, but hopefully, one day the Lamar family will receive the closure they seek. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ronell Burns. On November 6th, 2021, around 9 p.m., a concerned neighbor called emergency services to report hearing frantic screams and multiple gunshots coming from a nearby house. Responding police officers rushed to the scene and entered the home, where they discovered the lifeless bodies of a man and a woman lying on the floor. Following a thorough examination of the crime scene, the police launched an investigation into the tragic incident. The victims were identified as Ronell and Kiana Burns, a married couple. The question on everyone's mind was, who would commit such a heinous crime and what could be the motive? The Burns family resided in a spacious house in Gwinnett County, an area known for its remarkable ethnic diversity. Although the house did not appear to have been burgled, with all belongings still in their original places, the police were able to uncover a crucial lead in the double murder case relatively quickly. Let's go back in time and uncover the true roots of the tragedy that befell the Burns family. We begin with Kiana, born on September 15, 1977, in St. Louis, Missouri. After graduating from Riverview Garden High School, she attended St. Louis Community College in Florissant Valley, where she studied cosmetology and eventually started building her career. Kiana's hard work and perseverance paid off, and she opened her own successful beauty salon, which became popular. She was driven by her dream of living a luxurious and wealthy life, and her dedication paid off over the next 20 years. With time, she transformed her salon into one of the largest in the St. Louis area. However, Kiana's personal life was not without its challenges. As a strong, wealthy, and ambitious woman, she found it difficult to find a worthy partner. By the time she was 44, she had 3 children from previous relationships, whom she loved deeply. Her family described her as a great and loving mother, a supportive friend, and a successful businesswoman. Kiana seemed to have it all when she met her future husband, Ronell Burns. Ronell Burns was born in St. Louis, Missouri, on May 14, 1975. After graduating from the High School of Fashion in 1994, he played on the basketball team and even competed for a state championship. With a driven and ambitious personality, Ronell thrived on competition and always aimed for greatness. Before meeting Kiana, Ronell had 2 children from a previous relationship. When they got together, they formed a strong and happy family, bringing together 2 successful and ambitious individuals. On September 13, 2012, Ronell and Kiana officially tied the knot in a beautiful wedding ceremony attended by numerous relatives and friends. However, after the wedding, Kiana began to notice new aspects of Ronell's personality. It turned out that Ronell had dedicated his life to Jesus Christ at a young age and wanted to spread the Lord's word. He started serving everyone he could, even strangers he met on the street. Ronell created a website where he coached and preached, claiming that God spoke to him in his early years, instructing him to help people, and that he had the power to make things happen in life. Ronell continued to minister, and his video messages became extremely popular on the internet. Apart from being a church coach, he was also a financial counselor and insurance agent. He founded a company called Traditional Financial Solutions, with the goal of helping people worldwide achieve financial independence. Ronell achieved significant success in his business and efforts to help others, and his speeches drew large crowds. Kiana supported her husband, and together they gained online popularity as Ronell was already well known as a leader and coach in the 6-figure Ambition online program for entrepreneurs. He had a substantial online presence with over 7,000 followers on Instagram and 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, where Ronell frequently described. She had built and operated a successful network of salons through hard work, contributing significantly to the family's wealth. Ronell, on the other hand, wanted to project an image of success, often posing in expensive attire. The family regularly posted photos from high-end restaurants, but in reality, successful individuals rarely have the time to engage in lengthy conversations, whereas those struggling financially were often drawn to the Burns' den, promises of easy wealth without effort, relying on Ronell's guidance. Ronald Burns established a company called Six Figure Ambitions, allowing him to build his wealth and create a lasting legacy, which he frequently discussed in interviews. Ronell and his wife Kiana had built a close-knit family and were seen as inspirational role models by those around them. At the time, they had 3 children together, Rhea, McKay, and Ray. However, Ronell's ambition led him to suggest that Kiana leave her hometown of St. Louis and move to Atlanta. The real reason for the move was to expand their business, as Raul had taken over his wife's business and wanted to establish a chain of beauty salons in Atlanta. Owning 3 salons in St. Louis was no longer enough for him. Although Kiana was hesitant to leave St. Louis, she eventually agreed to the move. Despite her reservations, she continued to present a united front with her husband in public. On social media, Kiana portrayed her life as perfect, sharing photos of luxurious gifts from her husband, such as a Maserati Levante, and her extensive collection of Louis Vuitton bags. Each post was accompanied by captions expressing admiration and gratitude towards her husband. Kiana, a popular blogger, had built a loyal following on Instagram, where she frequently shared heartwarming moments with her children and family. However, in a surprising turn of events, she revealed to her audience that their seemingly perfect family life was not as idyllic as it appeared. In reality, she and her husband were on the brink of divorce, a situation that had developed after their move to Atlanta. In a candid video message, Kiana confessed to her subscribers that she was struggling to adjust to her new life in a big, unfamiliar city. She opened up about the difficulties of leaving her old life behind and starting anew, and how she relied on the support of her followers during this challenging period. Although Kiana's Instagram feed presented a picture of happiness and unity, behind the scenes, her family was going through a tough time. Her loyal subscribers were a source of comfort during the dark days, which had become increasingly frequent. When Kiana finally broke the news of her impending divorce, her followers were shocked. Behind their pious Christian facade, Rael and Kiana lived a life of luxury, frequently quoting the Bible and flaunting their wealth on social media. However, this was all an act. In reality, Rael worked for an insurance company that preyed on middle and lower-income families, and he even attempted to recruit his own family and friends into the scam. Their lavish spending eventually led to bankruptcy, forcing them to sell off some of their assets to pay their debts. Despite this, the couple continued to project an image of happiness and success, even considering a move to a bigger city to further their fraudulent activities. Kiana was well aware of Rael's infidelity and was tired of being silent and forgiving. Eventually, they decided to divorce, with Rael falsely accusing Kiana of infidelity to justify the split. Devastated, Kiana knew that their family and friends were oblivious to the couple's problems, as Rael had carefully concealed the truth to protect his reputation. On October 20th, just 10 days after Rael filed for divorce, Kiana appeared on live TV, looking uncharacteristically somber. Her usual bright smile had given way to an expression of concern and sadness. After divorcing his first wife, Rael Burns had remarried Kiana, a successful and wealthy woman. He had reinvented himself as a devout guru, presenting a changed and reliable image. But beneath the facade, he remained the same, exploiting Kiana's trust and wealth by pretending to be a successful businessman. On November 9, 2021, 44-year-old Kiana Burns ended her tumultuous marriage by fatally shooting her husband, 46-year-old Rael Burns, before taking her own life. The couple, who left behind 8 children, had no reported history of Demetner's down. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, to Cyrus and Malene Spencer. As a young boy, his passion for active games and sports helped him develop a strong physique and spirit. In high school, his exceptional skills earned him recognition as a standout member of the wrestling team. With a curious mind and a dream to carry on the family legacy, Frank enrolled in a local university after graduating from high school in 1984. He completed his studies in 1988 and, following his father's passing, took over the family business, becoming the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts and Used Cars. A pivotal moment in the young man's life took place in 1997 when fate introduced him to Maria. They instantly felt a strong connection. Maria was known for her fiery personality, bold nature, and intense emotions, which captivated those around her. According to Frank's friend Paul Siciliano, Frank had always been drawn to free-spirited individuals, and Maria was no exception. When the couple met, they had an instant spark and enjoyed each other's company. However, not everyone was thrilled about their relationship, particularly their parents. It was rumored that Maria's father, Anthony Rocco Franklin, had ties to a gang and was even known as a hired hitman. He took an immediate disliking to Frank and tried to prevent their union for some time. The Spencer family also disapproved of Frank's choice of partner, so the couple decided to elope and rent an apartment away from their families. This allowed them to maintain contact with their friends while keeping their families at a distance. As time passed, their families had no choice but to accept their relationship. Maria and Frank eventually got married and started a family, first having a boy and then a girl. The family later moved into a new home. Frank was a hard worker, owning an auto parts business and sponsoring racing cars. His top priority and motivation in life became providing everything necessary for his family, especially his children. Maria initially took on the responsibilities of managing the household and caring for the children. However, she eventually shifted her focus to coaching her daughter's soccer team, despite having a law degree. Friends observed that, unlike her husband, Maria seemed less invested in their marriage. She appeared distracted and somewhat detached from reality. Her lack of enthusiasm for domestic duties and responsibilities was evident. What truly concerned her, however, was the family's finances. While she freely spent the money Frank earned, her indifference towards the children was even more notable. Maria's behavior in her marriage became increasingly problematic over time. Her selfish and eccentric ways led to her husband's growing discontent. He believed that as a mother, she should have become more mature and considerate of others, but Maria showed no signs of changing. By 2006, her husband had had enough and filed for divorce, exhausted by her constant scandals and inappropriate behavior. He was also worried about the negative impact her behavior was having on their children's well-being, and eventually, divorce seemed like the only way out. After deciding to separate, the relationship between the former spouses became increasingly strained. A confrontation ensued. Spencer was adamant that he should have full custody of the children, as he distrusted his ex-wife and believed she was incapable of providing proper care. However, not everyone in Spencer's circle agreed with his stance. For instance, his friend Ron argued that for the sake of the children's normal development, both parents needed to be involved. He strongly advised Spencer to negotiate with Maria and share custody equally. Despite this, Spencer was convinced he knew what was best and continued to demand sole custody. In response, Maria also demanded sole custody and was counting on receiving substantial child support payments. The conflict escalated over time. Due to his ex-wife Maria's erratic behavior, Frank had to call the police on multiple occasions. Maria would not only attack him, but also their children. Not everyone believed Frank's claims, however. That was until an incident in 2008 that validated his story. Maria got into a physical fight with her former mother-in-law near their child's school. The situation unfolded when Maria showed up to pick up their daughter, despite Frank's mother trying to intervene. It turned out that Frank's mother was justified in stopping Maria, as they had a prior arrangement that day, but Maria changed her plans at the last minute. Following the altercation, Maria took their child and drove away without buckling her up. The police pulled her over and deemed her actions a threat to the child's life and health. As a result, Maria faced legal repercussions, including charges of disorderly conduct. Frank also accused Maria of stalking him, alleging that she repeatedly followed him. Maria was subsequently charged with this additional crime. Ultimately, the prosecution failed to prove the threat to the child's life, and Maria agreed to plead guilty to disorderly conduct and stalking in exchange for the dropped charges. Maria ultimately admitted her guilt and was fined $600. Yet this did not deter her from continuing her disruptive behavior. In fact, she became even more bitter and resentful following the incident. Frank's friends and family members began to hear more frequent complaints from him as Maria's threats and stalking intensified. Some of Maria's colleagues even revealed that she had openly expressed her hatred for Frank and threatened to take his life. This prompted one of her coworkers to jokingly refer to her as the Black Widow. Despite Maria's aggressive behavior, Frank attempted to remain calm and composed. He made multiple attempts to reason with his former partner, but she refused to back down. As a precaution, Frank started documenting all their conflicts, not to provoke legal action against Maria, but to protect himself in case something went wrong. His sole desire was to live and work in peace, but Maria's behavior had clearly crossed the line. By 2009, Frank and Maria's divorce had dragged on for years, with the children remaining in Maria's care. Despite his struggles, Frank eventually found solace in a new relationship with Julie Dent. However, it wasn't long before Maria discovered Frank's new romance. Although she claimed not to be bothered by Frank's relationship with Julie, in reality, she was deeply upset that Julie was forming bonds with her children. Frank, on the other hand, believed that Maria's intense jealousy was the root of all their troubles. This realization only fueled Maria's anger, culminating in a threatening voicemail to Julie in February 2009, warning her to stay away from her kids. The situation took a turn for the worse when the main character's father-in-law, Rocco, was released from prison after serving a 5-year sentence for fraud. Having spent time behind bars only seemed to worsen Rocco's notorious reputation, and Frank knew from past experiences that this spelled trouble. Many people believed that Maria had inherited her father's troublesome nature. This development made Frank's circle notice that he had become increasingly pensive and worried, and with good reason. The first incident following Rocco's release was a break-in at Frank's office, where important documents related to the divorce proceedings were stolen. The next day, Maria contacted her ex-husband and hinted that she had found a trash bag containing some interesting items on her porch. Frank understood what she was getting at and advised her to return the stolen goods. He also reported the incident to the police, but unfortunately, they were unable to find any evidence linking anyone to the crime. While the investigation was unable to prove anyone's involvement, it was clear to everyone that Maria and her father had a motive. The ex-wife was also considered a suspect, but in the end, the case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Meanwhile, thanks to the authorities' efforts, Maria returned the stolen documents to their rightful owner. It seemed that the documents didn't contain anything substantial that could be used in court anyway. The failure to gather evidence was seen by Frank's adversaries as a green light to act with impunity. The situation grew more intense. Afterwards, the ex-partner began making threats on social media. She remained unhappy that the kids were in touch with Julie. In contrast, the new partner remained calm and composed. She took pleasure in spending time with her partner and his children. She avoided getting involved in the complex relationships between her ex-husband and his former spouses. But she was furious that Maria's desire for revenge had led her to neglect her parental responsibilities. The disputes dragged on until 2010, when Frank finally lost patience. He could no longer tolerate the situation and turned to the authorities for help. He asked the police to evaluate his ex-wife's behavior and provided them with their correspondence, which included implicit threats. However, Maria insisted that this was simply her communication style and that she didn't mean to threaten anyone. Once again, it was impossible to prove her guilt, as her warnings were too vague to be taken as concrete threats. Frank's tormentor got away with it again. In January 2010, disaster struck Frank once more. He and his partner had planned a romantic getaway to the Caribbean, but the night before they were due to leave, a fire broke out at his mother's house. Although no one was injured, the property was completely destroyed by the flames and smoke. Witnesses reported that a car driven by Maria, accompanied by neighbors and acquaintances, pulled up outside the house. The woman behind the wheel was seen smiling as she watched the scene before driving off. Tragically, after the fire had been extinguished, a dog belonging to one of Frank's children was found dead in the ashes. Frank was forced to call the police again, but despite their suspicions, no one believed the fire was anything other than an accident. It was clear, however, that Maria would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Yet, with no evidence of deliberate arson surviving the blaze, the fire was ruled an accident. After sending a message to Frank, in which she subtly gloated about how karma had caught up with him, the frenzied woman started sending similar messages to Julie, too. As the police failed to take action, Maria became increasingly audacious, eventually feeling bold enough to make public threats against her ex and his new partner. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house, where she was home at the time. Fortunately, she escaped by jumping off the porch roof and was unharmed, although her home was left uninhabitable. In response, Frank invited Julie to move in with him, which the young couple feared would only enrage his ex further, but they had no other choice. At the same time, an investigation into the cause of the fire was underway. The similarity in the method used suggested that it was the same person or people responsible. Although the woman's home was located in a different county, the couple hoped for an unbiased investigation by the police. Unfortunately, the lack of evidence meant they were unable to assist, and the fire could have been dismissed as a freak accident. However, Julie was resolute and appealed to higher authorities, which unexpectedly moved the investigation forward. The search of the suspect's backyard yielded flares, including a damaged one lying in the grass. Another flare, similar to the one that had caused the fire, was also discovered. Furthermore, experts found that the steps on the home's terrace had been soaked with a flammable mixture. After thorough inspections and expert analysis, arson was officially declared as the cause of the fire. Despite this, the lack of direct evidence once again meant that the perpetrators escaped punishment. Summer 2012 was unseasonably cold. In June of that year, Frank and Julie faked a breakup as part of a clever plan to throw Maria off guard. This was followed by the real final demise of the Spencer marriage. But the hoped-for peace didn't materialize. Just weeks later, on July 3rd, Frank was tragically found dead. Joe, a close friend, decided to visit him because he hadn't heard from Frank in a while, which didn't come as a shock to anyone. Frank had recently gone through a divorce and was seeking solitude. However, there was an urgent matter to attend to. For years, the friends had been teammates in a recreational karting league with their kids, and they were in the middle of a crucial series that they were determined to win. But unexpected setbacks could jeopardize their chances of success. Since Frank wasn't responding to phone calls, Joe decided to visit him in person. When Joe arrived at the cottage, he grew anxious. The front door was slightly open, and there were suspicious stains near the threshold. His worst fears were confirmed as soon as he stepped inside the house. He found his friend Frank lying lifeless on the floor. Despite the gruesome scene, Frank's face looked peaceful, as if he had finally found the tranquility he had been searching for. As Joe walked around the body, he noticed dried blood in Frank's ear. Without delay, Joe called emergency services as an accidental witness to the scene. When news of the shocking incident spread throughout the district, the culprit behind the horrific crime was instantly suspected. However, it was up to the detectives to gather concrete evidence and piece together the puzzle on their own. Upon arriving at the scene, forensic experts discovered a gruesome sight, with large pools of blood and several long drag marks. Furthermore, they found a clear shoe print on the floor and blood-stained gloves in the kitchen. These crucial pieces of physical evidence were sent to the lab for further analysis. A further investigation revealed that the bloody shoe print found at the scene matched the size of the shoes worn by Rocco, who is Maria's father. Additionally, skin cells from Frank's ex-wife were discovered inside the gloves that were examined. Notably, the ex-wife had not lived with the deceased for over a year, which means it was highly unlikely that the gloves containing her fresh DNA were left at the house by accident. Overall, all the evidence gathered suggested that both Rocco and Frank's ex-wife were involved in the crime. Soon, the suspects were detained. Autopsy and ballistics analysis determined that Frank Spencer had been shot with two different types of weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper's nest approximately 115 feet from the house. The bullet passed through his hand and penetrated his chest, striking a vital artery. The shot was fatal. However, the attackers did not stop there. They dragged the poor man inside, where a final taunting shot was fired into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. By that time, the man was already deceased. Therefore, the final shot was seen as an act of revenge. It was clear that the shooter harbored hatred toward his victim. Consequently, police speculated that Rocco fired from the rifle, while Maria finished what was started. Additionally, it was discovered that alongside the crime, Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, exposing Rocco and Maria. By reviewing traffic cameras, Spencer's car was spotted on a federal highway moving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. Unfortunately, it was not possible to identify the driver. Eventually, the vehicle was found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's home and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were discovered inside the car. Regarding the victim's dog, it was found 2 days after the incident, having wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Attendees immediately realized that the well-groomed animal had an owner thanks to a microchip. The dog was returned to Spencer's mother. It turned out that Frank had gotten a new pet for his children after the fire. This fortunate discovery helped clarify some aspects and effectively exposed the crime. According to the investigation, the criminals took the dog when they fled the scene. On their way home, Rocco stopped, and during this time, attracted by nearby food smells, the dog managed to escape. Subsequently, it ended up at a house where a wedding ceremony was taking place. This allowed detectives to prove that Rocco's phone pinged near the celebration site on the day of the crime, while his residence in Harrisburg was 12 miles away, contradicting his assertion that he was at home. Likely, it was Maria's idea to take the dog to the children, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Rue admitted that his son-in-law had repeatedly asked him for help and had visited him the day before his death, which explains the traces found at the crime scene. However, Rocco could not explain the presence of a blood pool, and his statement sounded insincere. No one could confirm whether the men got along well or otherwise. Rocco also confessed that Frank had given him the vehicle to use that same day, apparently to justify his fingerprints in the victim's home. By doing so, he essentially admitted to being at the crime scene the day before. Searches were organized at the homes of Rocco and his daughter to find the crime weapons, but the seasoned criminal knew how to dispose of firearms, so neither the rifle nor the revolver was found. Ultimately, it would not have been difficult for him to dispose of the crime weapon. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She insisted that the glove ended up in her ex's house by accident, possibly moved by the children on one of the days. In the end, the suspects were released home. However, detectives did not close the case and continued to gather necessary evidence. Meanwhile, Frank's friend Derek Reed managed to talk to the former friend during a school football match. During their conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before his death was her face. Her statement sounded odd. The investigation received heightened attention from the state's attorney general, who was extremely upset with the authorities' indifference to Frank's reports and statements. Moreover, the police received numerous complaints about their incompetence. An internal investigation was unavoidable. Unfortunately, it was not possible to prove the officers' negligent attitude towards their duty. According to the police, much information provided by Spencer lacked solid evidence, and the only person who could confirm or refute the officer's words was deceased. The public and the victims' relatives were extremely outraged that their petitions yielded no results. Meanwhile, investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt, not only in the crime, but also in stalking and other offenses committed earlier. In 2013, a major interrogation was organized. At the same time, Maria and Rocco continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to accusations of providing false testimony. Prosecutors believed that the suspects arrived at Spencer's house together and chose not to use their own transport to avoid drawing attention. Thus, they fled the scene in the victim's car. In late 2014, Maria was arrested again. By this time, Rocco had managed to flee after the last interrogation. He boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. The investigation interpreted the man's behavior as flight and proof of guilt. For 11 months, the criminal was elusive. Eventually, he was apprehended in Buenos Aires, Argentina, after being arrested by local police and fighting extradition to the U.S. However, the criminal's efforts were in vain, and he was sent back to his home country. Justice prevailed in the fall of 2015. Maria's trial took place, and she continued to deny her guilt, shifting the blame to her father. The accused claimed she loved Frank and never wished for his demise. However, numerous witnesses exposed her true character, recounting long-term threats, stalking, and arson. The trial lasted just over a week, and in the end, the jury delivered their verdict, finding her guilty on all counts, including deprivation of life, arson, burglary, providing false statements, conspiracy, and making threats. Maria was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years. Eyewitnesses claim that Maria smiled constantly during the trial. "I didn't end his life, so I tried to stay optimistic," she explained in a later interview. A few years later, trials began for Rocco. He was extremely displeased with his daughter's accusations. The defendant insisted he was merely helping her, but was against violence. It was Maria who insisted on the crime. However, physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony Franklin was found guilty of deprivation of life, as well as robbery and arson. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 45 years. Upon sentencing, the 77-year-old man blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing the judge. Years later, Rocco sought a retrial, claiming his defense attorney had been ineffective, which led to his conviction. Maria also attempted to appeal her case. However, both father and daughter's efforts were fruitless. Every divorce has negative consequences, but for some people, it leads to severe financial problems and emotional distress, resulting in changes to their social status and lifestyle. However, with time, things usually stabilize. Frank Spencer's situation was an exception, as his breakup ultimately proved fatal. It's worth noting that the relationship he was in was extremely toxic. By staying with his partner, Frank was in effect nurturing a dangerous enemy and putting his own life at risk. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jessica Patel. The case began with an emergency call from the husband Mitesh at 8:24 p.m. on May 14, 2018. The Cleveland police in the UK received the call from 37-year-old Mitesh Patel. In the call, he spoke about a burglary at their home and his wife being attacked. Mitesh described that upon returning home after shopping and picking up a computer at the office, he discovered their house had been ransacked, and his wife Jessica was unconscious on the floor, tied up with duct tape all over her body. Mitesh panicked, asking whether he should remove the duct tape and take his wife out of the house, but the police advised him to leave everything as it was. His voice was very shaky, and he was almost unable to remain calm. The call continued as Mitesh requested the police to send help, and they promised to arrive shortly. After the call ended, the police quickly appeared along with an ambulance. However, despite their efforts, they were too late. Jessica had stopped breathing and had passed away. Jessica was born in 1983 in a beautiful city in the western part of England. She was the eldest of 6 children in a traditional and well-educated Indian family. Both of her parents were successful and respected members of society. From a young age, Jessica was a well-behaved and cheerful child, the pride of her family. Though gentle and somewhat shy, Jessica was very determined and ambitious. She had dreams and always strived to turn those dreams into reality. She recognized her career path early on, aspiring to become a pharmacist and own her own pharmacy. Therefore, throughout her growth, she always tried to study and work hard. Jessica was a dreamer, like many other young women. From childhood, she had shown a love for romantic things, often watching Hollywood romantic movies and dreaming of finding her true love. In the early 2000s, Jessica pursued a degree in pharmacy at De Montfort University before continuing her studies at the University of Manchester. At De Montfort, she reunited with Mitesh, an old school friend from secondary school, with whom she had briefly been close before they went their separate ways. Their reunion as adults seemed like fate. They shared many similarities in personality and family background. Mitesh, a calm and reserved man, also studied pharmacy and came from a large Hindu family much like Jessica's. They often spent hours talking on the phone without getting bored, showing care and always listening to each other. Jessica's room was filled with stuffed animals gifted by Mitesh, symbols of the warmth and affection he had for her. As mentioned earlier, Jessica was a dreamer, and therefore, receiving such gentle and warm treatment from a man made it easy for her to immerse herself in it and be swept away. Not long after getting to know Mitesh, Jessica's mother fell seriously ill and later passed away. It was one of the most challenging times in Jessica's life. During this difficult period, Mitesh stood by her, encouraging Jessica and providing a strong shoulder for her to lean on. After this event, Jessica realized that Mitesh was the man she wanted to marry. In July 2009, Mitesh and Jessica held a grand wedding with hundreds of guests attending to bless the young couple. The ceremony took place in a picturesque garden, marking the first time in their Hindu community that a wedding had attracted such a large number of guests, approximately 600. This momentous event was a testament to the deep love and unbreakable bond between Jessica and Mitesh. After marrying, Mitesh convinced Jessica to move to Middlesbrough, a city more than an hour's drive away from Leeds, where her entire family lived. Though initially hesitant about moving so far from her loved ones, Jessica eventually agreed to follow her husband. Both Jessica and Mitesh were born into well-off families, and shortly after their marriage, they bought a large house in one of the most affluent and beautiful areas in Linthorpe. Their ambition did not stop there, as the young couple also purchased a pharmacy on Roman Road, a bustling area in the region. The business flourished, leading them to hire more staff and upgrade both the shop and their home. Not long thereafter, nearly everyone in the area knew of the pharmacist couple for their friendliness and likability. Jessica and Mitesh's life was almost picture-perfect at this point. The only thing missing from their complete family was a child. Having grown up in a large family, Jessica always dreamed of becoming a mother. However, achieving this was not easy for them. After many years of trying, they still could not experience the joy of parenthood. Like many other couples facing fertility challenges, they resorted to in vitro fertilization, IVF, to conceive. Unfortunately, Jessica and Mitesh were plagued by misfortune throughout their journey to have a child. After 3 different IVF attempts and numerous consultations, the results were still unsuccessful. The cycle of hope and disappointment had a significant impact on their mood, and both were deeply saddened and distressed, but they never gave up. Their relentless persistence eventually brought a glimmer of hope to the young couple in 2018 on their 4th attempt. The doctor announced that they had successfully fertilized 3 embryos, and the chances of success were very high. Joy overwhelmed Jessica, and she immediately called her sister, sharing her happiness and intuition about the promising outcome. Jessica's long-held dream of becoming a mother was about to become a reality. However, unexpectedly, just a few weeks later, her beautiful dream was shattered by an unforeseen tragedy. May 14, 2018 began like any other day for Jessica. She went to work at the pharmacy while her father visited Mitesh, who only worked half a day. Mitesh left the pharmacy in the early afternoon to go to the gym, and around 7 p.m., Jessica returned home. Mitesh then stopped by the pharmacy to pick up a computer and bought a pizza to take home. Upon his arrival, Mitesh encountered a horrifying scene. He discovered a disturbing situation and immediately contacted the police. It was approximately 8:20 p.m. when Mitesh reported to the police that his wife was lifeless with no pulse. He stated that he had left the house about an hour earlier and found her unconscious. He had removed tape from her neck, legs, and arms, emphasizing that there was no response from her when questioned about the bruises. Mitesh noticed bruises on her neck and blood on the floor, and he attempted to wake her up in distress, but his efforts were unsuccessful. On the other end, the police informed him that an ambulance was on its way. Eventually, when the medical team entered the house, they found Jessica in the living room. They did everything they could to save her, but it was too late. On the morning of August 15th, the residents of Linthorpe were shocked to learn that the local pharmacist had been murdered in her own home. This tragic news immediately caused widespread unrest and anxiety within the community, leaving people around the area bewildered and frightened. It seemed that a bold thief was rampaging through the peaceful residential area, and every resident felt vulnerable, fearing they could be the next victim. The shock from this event prompted the community to take swift action, rushing to buy additional locks and install security systems to protect their homes. Just the day before, their neighborhood had been peaceful, but now everything had changed. Immediately after receiving the call, the police promptly arrived to secure the crime scene. The first 60 minutes following a murder are crucial for collecting clues and evidence, and therefore, the police immediately proceeded to cordon off the area. Minal, one of Jessica's sisters, awoke to find her husband motionless at the foot of the bed in the dead of night. Instantly, she sensed something was amiss. This disturbing news quickly reached Jessica's family, who rushed to Jessica and Mitesh's residence. Upon entering the living room, Minal found Mitesh slumped on the sofa, head in hands. She sat beside him, offering solace, and Mitesh, overcome with emotion, buried his face in her shoulder, surrendering to uncontrollable sobs. Minal reassured him that no matter the circumstances, the family would stand by him unwaveringly. The room was heavy with sorrow, and the sound of weeping spread, piercing the hearts of all present. After the police asked Mitesh and Jessica's family to leave the house, they began a thorough examination of the crime scene. The first thing they noticed was that there were no signs of forced entry or vandalism from the outside, suggesting that Jessica might have known her attacker, although Mitesh insisted that she was trusting and could have opened the door to anyone. Meanwhile, the police needed to verify the alibis of all the people involved, and the first person on their list was Mitesh, who had the closest relationship with Jessica. The police needed clear details about Mitesh's actions that day, not just to confirm his alibi, but also to establish the timeline of the intruder's entry into the house. Determining exactly when Mitesh left the house was crucial, allowing the police to check the surveillance footage from the security cameras in the area during the time of the crime. Mitesh admitted that he had left the house around 7 p.m. to buy pizza and then drove home, where he discovered Jessica unconscious in the living room next to the window, with her legs and arms tied with tape. The house was in a state of disarray, with items scattered everywhere. Mitesh stated that he was away from home for just over half an hour, so Jessica must have been murdered between 7:45 and 8:20 p.m. Previous examination results showed that Jessica died from asphyxiation, and the bruises on her neck indicated that the attacker had used a type of cord to strangle her on May 17, 2018. Just 3 days after Jessica's death, the family received a call from the police informing them that a suspect had been arrested the previous afternoon. According to the police, a 37-year-old man suspected of being involved in Jessica's murder had been detained. The next day, when the family went to the police station to confirm the identity of the suspect, they were shocked and disbelieving. It was Mitesh Patel, Jessica's husband, whom they had trusted and loved. Learning the truth left Jessica's family and the local community in a state of disbelief and shock. Initially, people thought there might have been a mistake in the police investigation. However, the police affirmed they had sufficient evidence to suspect Mitesh. This raised many questions, challenging the notion of how a husband like Mitesh, who seemingly loved his wife dearly, could commit such a heinous act. During the investigation, the police searched the house and found a hidden hard drive from the security camera system. It was concealed among the clothes and placed under the mattress in the bedroom. This security camera system had never been mentioned to the police by Mitesh before. The security camera data revealed that Mitesh had returned home at 3 p.m. and did not leave. Jessica left the house at 7 p.m. and returned at 8:15 p.m., but there was no evidence of anyone else entering or leaving the house. Exactly 6 minutes before Mitesh called the police, the security camera was disconnected. The police noticed scratch marks on Mitesh's neck, but he claimed they were from an accident at the gym. However, forensic examination revealed Jessica's DNA under Mitesh's fingernails, suggesting that she had struggled and resisted when he assaulted her. At the pharmacy, the police found the roll of tape used to bind Jessica. When comparing the torn piece of tape to the remaining roll, they matched perfectly. A suitcase full of clothes was also found under the bed, and during a search of the medicine cabinet, they discovered jewelry worth approximately 25,000 pounds in a gold bar stored in a safe. With this evidence, Mitesh became the prime suspect. The police decided to investigate Mitesh's motive by checking his mobile phone and personal computer. In the search history on Mitesh's computer, they uncovered a horrifying truth. Since 2013, or precisely about 5 years before Jessica was murdered, Mitesh had been searching the web for keywords like "how to kill wife," "insulin overdose," and even viewed a video on the time needed to make someone stop breathing entirely. Notably, shortly after searching for these terms, he purchased a life insurance policy worth £2 million on Jessica. The police found irrefutable evidence when examining the iPhones of both Mitesh and Jessica. Mitesh seemed confident in his intelligence, but he was unaware that iPhones have a health app that records the user's heart rate and activity. This app tracks every movement up and down stairs, as well as heart rate, and all this data is accurately recorded according to specific timestamps. The health app on Mitesh's phone showed that after returning home with the pizza, Mitesh did not immediately call the police. Instead, he went upstairs for about 4 minutes, which led the police to believe that this could have been the time he attempted to hide the hard drive of the security camera system. The health app also showed that Mitesh was running around the house at approximately 7:04 p.m., implying that he was scattering items to create a fake crime scene of a burglary. He then moved Jessica's phone and placed it near the entrance to suggest that an intruder had dropped it while fleeing. Mitesh had thoroughly planned to kill his wife, hiding their troubled marriage from the world. The trial exposed the shocking reality behind their seemingly perfect relationship, catching Jessica's family off guard. Mitesh confessed to the entire process of committing the crime and the full story behind the case. On May 14, 2018, Mitesh returned home after his earlier gym session, while Jessica came home around 7 p.m., unaware that Mitesh had been waiting for her. As Jessica entered the house, death awaited her. Mitesh acted quickly, using a plastic bag to cover Jessica's head, attempting to suffocate her. Though Jessica struggled and fought for her life, the plastic bag tore, but Mitesh did not stop there. He injected a large dose of insulin into Jessica's body, causing her to lose strength and the ability to resist. Coldly, like a monster, Mitesh strangled Jessica until she could no longer breathe. Immediately after, the truth behind the seemingly happy family image of Jessica and Mitesh was exposed. The wedding photos from July 2009 capture a moment of happiness and radiance, with the bride Jessica shining in her beautiful sari, young and joyful beside her new husband. When Jessica and Mitesh began dating in college, he seemed to be the ideal boyfriend, always showering her with romantic gifts and tender love. They appeared to be the perfect couple when Mitesh proposed in 2009, even though the family thought it was too soon. Jessica managed to convince them of their love and decision, despite her family's strict adherence to Hinduism, as they did not want to wait. Divya depicted Jess as graceful, witty, and feminine. As children, they connected over Bollywood love stories, igniting Jess's aspirations for romance and family. Their extravagant garden wedding in Leeds, where Jess was raised, signaled the beginning of their new chapter. Mitesh led a secret life, engaging with men on Grindr, while his marriage to Jessica was a facade to hide his true sexual orientation from his family and community. Jessica was unaware of the deception, believing she had found a loving husband. The days that followed were filled with suffering and grief. Within a year, cracks in Jessica and Mitesh's relationship became evident. Jessica confided in her sisters that she felt Mitesh's behavior had gradually changed after their wedding. A significant shock came to the family when she revealed that they had not been sexually intimate for 10 months, a short time after their marriage. Concurrently, Mitesh became increasingly controlling in their relationship. When Jessica's grandfather fell seriously ill and was moved to a special care room, the family spent time at his bedside. Jessica, his beloved granddaughter, could only make brief visits. Jessica told her sister that Mitesh would not let her stay, and they had argued in the car about it, and he had hit her. Jessica also revealed to her sisters that Mitesh occasionally choked her and often kept inexplicable secrets. Her sister further said that if Mitesh was on the phone when Jessica walked into the room, he would leave and continue the conversation in one of the attic rooms, sometimes not returning until 4 a.m. Despite the mistreatment she endured, Jessica was a forgiving and gentle woman, and she harbored no resentment towards her husband and did not want to abandon their marriage. Perhaps her love for him had become something greater, allowing her to endure all the unfair treatment that Mitesh inflicted on her. However, ultimately, Jessica's heart was completely shattered when she discovered the devastating truth that Mitesh had never loved her. Mitesh, a gay Hindu man, used Jessica as a front to conceal his sexuality and uphold his family's honor. He used dating apps, brought lovers home, and disregarded Jessica's feelings in the process. Mitesh had numerous same-sex partners but loved only one. After 2 years, he began an intense affair with Dr. Amit Patel, whom he met on Grindr, and even brought his lover home, introducing him as a friend to Jessica, the oblivious wife unaware of her husband's infidelity. Mitesh recently purchased a pharmaceutical business in Middlesbrough and planned to relocate the family, much to his wife's dismay. Despite this, he maintained active involvement on gay dating apps. The pressure to have kids was a constant burden for the couple. After 6 years, Jessica agreed to IVF, unaware that Mitesh planned to have a family with his lover using her embryos. Jessica's family was devastated to learn Mitesh never wanted children with Jessica and secretly took birth control to prevent natural conception during the 2-year IVF process. Jessica went through tough times, and after each setback, she'd tell her sister, "I can't do this anymore. It hurts too much." Her mental health suffered, but she persevered. The 4th round of IVF was successful, and in May 2018, they learned 3 embryos were ready for implantation. Days later, Jessica was overjoyed to become a mother, but tragically, she passed away the next day. In 2016, Amit immigrated to Australia, and Mitesh began dreaming of a new life with his lover in a new country. He even texted his lover, "I told you her day had been marked," indicating that he saw his wife as an obstacle and was ready to remove her. Mitesh had harbored dreams of a family with his lover and planned to bring embryos to Australia, where they would care for their children together. The police also discovered that Mitesh was researching housing prices in the Australian city where he and his lover lived. Mitesh's sinister plan, after eliminating Jessica, was to use the life insurance payout he had taken out on his wife to have the financial means and freedom to start the life he truly anticipated. Prosecutors also stated that Mitesh's motive was always to escape the strict upbringing of his Hindu family and move to Australia to be with his lover and start a new family. Mitesh was also set to inherit a life insurance policy worth £2 million. The culmination of all of Mitesh's cruel actions and plans was a life sentence with no parole for at least 30 years. The jury took 2 hours and 50 minutes to convict Mitesh at the trial. Mitesh displayed no emotion when Judge James Goss told him, "You are a selfish, business-obsessed individual who wanted a successful life and wished to retire at 40. You also wanted to commit to living with another man according to your own desires, and you knew that the insurance policy would grant you £2 million following Jessica's death." Judge James Goss also stated that the minimum term of 30 years is reserved for cases where the severity of the criminal act is particularly grave. He added, "This is such a case. Only Mitesh can truly answer why he did this. Everything he did was for selfish reasons. He could have divorced Jessica and taken everything he wanted without needing to take her life. He had no right to commit this wicked, cruel, and vile act." The suffering of the victim's family seems to follow them for the rest of their lives, especially as they have lost Jessica forever. Hopefully, the story of Jessica will inspire other victims of domestic violence to seek help instead of suffering in silence. Jessica will never be forgotten, and we also wish to send prayers for her to rest in peace.